They thought they knew you, thought they had measured your capabilities, plotted the borders of your temperament, and defined the limits of your protection. They assumed the silence surrounding you was emptiness, not strategy, that the ones around you were background characters, not sentinels. But the moment the veil was lifted and the truth exposed, who guards you, who advises you, who stands silently in your corner, the temperature of the room shifted. Suddenly, eyes widened, tongues stilled, their arrogance, once free roaming, began to retreat like a tide pulled back by something ancient and unspeakable. Because it wasn't just you they underestimated, it was the unseen force protecting you. A force that doesn't wear uniforms, doesn't post threats online, and doesn't seek attention. A force that doesn't yell at watches, calculates, strikes once. You never had to declare who stood with you. You let their disrespect build. You let them believe you were alone. You gave them the comfort of believing their betrayal would go unanswered. But your silence wasn't solitude, it was sanctuary. The kind of sanctuary that breeds legends in whispers. They didn't realize how many owed you, how many trained with you in shadows, how many you healed, advised, protected long before this war ever began. And when the secret broke, when the quiet truth of who shields your name surfaced, it shattered their confidence. Because now they know. Now they understand. That to come for you is to summon something far greater, far more calculated, and far more ruthless than anything they've prepared for. They weren't prepared for the people who don't need to speak your name to be loyal to it. You don't need to fight when your name is spoken with reverence in rooms you've never entered. That's what rattles them. They don't understand that real protection isn't advertised, it's activated. And what protects you isn't loyalty built on fear. It's debt. Emotional, intellectual, spiritual. You touched people they forgot existed. You gave them a reason to rise when they were rotting. You taught them how to see through illusion, and they never forgot. They watched you walk alone, not because you had no army, but because you had the discipline to never call it too early. That's what makes your guardians terrifying. They're not reactive. They don't move on impulse. They wait for your nod, and when it comes, they don't shout. They erase. Quietly, entirely, without ever needing credit. This was never just about who protects you. It's about why. Because the people who shield your name don't do it for reputation. They do it because of what you've endured, because of what you've survived, because of what you kept silent, even when the truth could have ruined your enemies 100 times over. That kind of discipline earns guardianship. You didn't buy protection. You became worthy of it. You bled for it. You endured humiliation while others barked loudly about loyalty, but never tasted pain for it. Your strength didn't call protectors, it summoned them. You're protected not because you demand it, but because you inspire it. And that distinction is what terrifies the ones who thought they could isolate you. They thought you were vulnerable. They thought you'd collapse. But they didn't know whose hands were steadying your foundation behind the curtain. They now walk with caution. Their mockery, once flamboyant and frequent, has shrunk into awkward silences. Because they've seen the messages, heard the rumors, witnessed the disappearances of those who went too far. Nobody needs to explain. The energy speaks. The shift is unmistakable, and it all leads back to you. Not as a tyrant, not as a puppet master, but as a center of gravity, someone who bends the loyalty of others without trying. You don't bark commands, you hold standards, and standards attract warriors. Silent ones, strategic ones, the kind that remember who held space for them when no one else did. They don't wave flags, they don't beg for a fight, they just watch. And they wait for your stillness to change. That's all it takes. Psychologically, you've become something untouchable. Not because you're loud, but because your network is spiritual, emotional, built on shared trauma and unspoken triumph. You don't surround yourself with many, but every one of them is surgical, purposeful, devoted beyond public comprehension. People who'd never appear in your photos, but would burn down worlds behind the scenes. That's the level of power that goes beyond threats. It becomes legend. The kind of legend that silences rooms just by being referenced. And now, your enemies are doing math they never thought they'd have to solve. How close were we to something irreversible? How many steps did we take that we can't walk back? The questions echo now, louder than their laughter ever did. They can't mock what they now fear. They can't reverse the narrative they helped write. Because the story turned without them knowing. They were busy analyzing your silence as weakness, while you were finalizing the architecture of your comeback. You let them drag your name, let them perform, let them think you were exposed. But what they never saw was the quiet echo chamber of influence that surrounds you. The people who may never speak in your defense publicly, but have enough power to erase someone socially, financially, psychologically, with a single whisper. That's the difference. You don't need to scream your worth when others have sworn to protect it in rooms you've never entered. You are not feared because you're dangerous. You are feared because you are remembered. And the people who remember you, the ones you impacted when it cost you everything, those people are now your armor. They don't need to defend you because you don't need defending. But if the time comes, they will. Not with noise, with silence that stops pulses, with emails that never reach the inbox, with decisions made behind closed doors that reverse entire outcomes. And that's what those who plotted your downfall never accounted for. They attacked you like a lone figure, not realizing they were poking a hive that you never had to announce. A hive that guards without permission. Because loyalty forged in truth doesn't need coordination. It simply moves when you do. Now your presence holds weight it never had to earn with titles or volume. People double-check their tone when your name comes up. They hesitate before pushing too far. Not because they suddenly believe in your strength, but because they now fear your circle. They saw what happens when the silent ones start to move. When the protectors you never bragged about begin to whisper in their own corners. And that's the price of underestimating someone who walks quietly. The threat isn't the person. They're the fuse. It's what follows that burns. And in your case, what follows doesn't burn recklessly. It burns surgically. You used to need answers. You used to beg for closure, for kindness, for understanding. Not anymore, because you learned to identify chaos by the silence it demanded from you. You used to stay up, dissecting every word they didn't say. You begged the void for an explanation, thinking if you could just understand it, you could survive it. But survival doesn't begin with answers. It begins with refusal. Refusal to keep surrendering your clarity to people who feed on confusion. You were taught to believe silence was neutrality, a kind of spiritual Switzerland. It wasn't. It was weaponized. It was camouflage for control. You watched them ignore you when your eyes screamed for truth. You learned that silence, when it comes from someone who has all the answers but offers none, is not peace, it's warfare. And you stopped playing prisoner in a war you didn't start. They once had the power to keep you spiraling with a single pause. That's the grip confusion has when you still care. You used to chase softness from those who sharpen their teeth behind your back. You'd crawl through their emotional wreckage, trying to salvage something you could rebuild with, but they left you no bricks, only smoke. And you breathed it like oxygen. You internalized their evasion, thought maybe you were too much, too emotional, too analytical. But eventually you saw the pattern. The silence after their cruelty, the disappearing acts when accountability came knocking. That's when it hit you. People who operate in chaos do so in quiet rooms. Because chaos doesn't just shout, it simmers, it waits, and it watches what you tolerate when you're starving for clarity. You were starving. Now you're surgical. Now you leave the room before you're reduced to begging for meaning from mouths that never meant to feed you. You studied the mechanics of manipulation by watching how often silence followed your truth. You'd speak. They'd disappear. You'd cry. They'd minimize. You'd ask for honesty. They'd change the subject. At first, you thought they didn't understand. Later, you realized they understood perfectly. They just couldn't afford to validate the version of you that could walk away. So they fed you ambiguity. Carefully measured, emotionally calculated ambiguity. And you drank it. But now you spit it out. You no longer seek kindness from chaos. You no longer stretch your voice trying to decode someone else's dysfunction. You recognize now that anyone who truly respects your spirit doesn't offer silence in response to your pain. They lean in. They meet it. They speak. The rest. Noise wrapped in absence. They used to withhold affection and call it reflection. Withhold answers and call it maturity. You used to fall for it. You used to call it a phase, a miscommunication, a bad day. But time revealed the pattern. The disappearance always followed your honesty. The coldness always arrived after your vulnerability. And that's not confusion. That's choreography. Emotional withholding isn't random. It's rehearsed. It's rehearsed until you break. And when you broke, they exhaled. That was the game. To push you into questioning yourself while they avoided every mirror you tried to hold up. But now, you're the mirror. Now they flinch before they speak because they know. Your silence is no longer desperation. It's discernment. It's departure with dignity. The version of you that begged for closure didn't die. She evolved. She realized closure is often a luxury manipulators withhold as their final performance. You were taught to wait. Wait for the apology, the understanding, the mutual moment where the hurt is named and healed. That moment never came. But instead of letting it harden you, it cleared you. It clarified what love isn't, what maturity isn't, what real connection refuses to do, vanish in the face of accountability. You no longer interpret avoidance as sensitivity. You interpret it correctly now as selfishness. And you've become the kind of person who doesn't argue with selfishness. You exit it without debate, without announcement, without remorse. You used to write long texts trying to translate your emotions into something palatable for people who never planned to digest them. You thought if you could just phrase it right, deliver it gently, with care, they'd finally see you. But you learned. Some people don't want to see you. They want to see you need them. And once they don't feel needed, they don't feel obligated to respect you. That's what used to break you. The fact that you were polite in your pain and they still walked away. Now, you don't phrase things gently. You don't over-explain. You speak once. And if the silence that follows feels manipulative, you move. You don't sit in burning houses hoping the flames feel sorry. You walk out, glowing. Now when they go silent, you don't panic, you calculate, you measure, you document. You don't beg anymore, you observe. And in that observation, you build the boundary. Not out of anger, but out of evidence. You trust what they withhold more than what they offer. Because now you understand. Words are cheap. Presence is the currency. And if they go missing when truth enters the room, then they were never holding your hand. They were holding the door open for their own escape. Let them. Your peace no longer depends on their return. You don't chase anymore. You don't explain to those who disappear in response to your depth. Let them drown in their shallowness. You're already building new oceans. Psychologically, you've reconstructed the entire way you process abandonment. You don't see it as a reflection of your unworthiness anymore. You see it as confirmation that you are, in fact, too aware for their comfort. That your presence demands a level of honesty they are not prepared to offer. You stopped questioning your worth. You started questioning their capacity. And that's where your freedom was forged. You don't want everyone to understand you now. You want them to reveal themselves. And if they run, let them. The ones meant for you don't flinch at your fullness. They don't shrink when your insight stings. They lean in. They answer. They don't confuse you with silence. They protect you with truth. You've become allergic to chaos now. Not because it hurts, but because you've named it. You can see it forming now, in tone, in timing, in withheld responses. You can smell it in the room like gasoline before the match drops. And instead of waiting for the fire, you leave. Because you finally believe what your gut said before your heart got involved. That peace is not earned by tolerating confusion. It's built by choosing clarity, even when it costs you closeness. That cost, you'll pay it every time. Because nothing is more expensive than staying in a room where silence is used to suppress your knowing. And you know too much now. So no, you don't beg for closure anymore. You've learned that closure comes from action, not explanation. You've trained yourself to read energy like scripture. And the moment it stops aligning, you stop offering access. That's the shift they didn't expect. You no longer break. You break away. And when you do, you don't leave breadcrumbs. You leave blueprints. For others like you who are done waiting for words from those who never deserved the weight of your voice in the first place.